Hi there, Frank Winston here for the Pacifica Historical Society. I'm the host of the show Footprints of Pacifica, where we explore and discover the lure and the lore of lovely Pacifica, its character and its characters. And the segment for this show is dealing with the school district of Pacifica and some of the schools, and we have two noted historians and former school teachers, and they're both close to this channel. Helen James has been a camera person for the shows for many years, including Footprints of Pacifica, and Sharon Walker hosts a show for this channel, which is Pacifica Currents. But each of them came to Pacifica as school teachers, and let's talk about that. Why, Sharon, did you come to Pacifica? First, before I do that, let's do a roll-in and a video of some of the background before you got here. So, roll the tape.
Legendary in the history of Pacifica schools is the fact that author Jack London, as a young 7-year-old child, lived here in 1883 on his stepfather's leased 75-acre potato farm in the Edgemar area. His quoted memory was of a bleak and sad coast. He would have to walk uphill to the San Pedro School, which was located in what is now the Fairmont area. The story goes that older kids would beat up the often drunk teacher, and the teacher would lash out at the younger kids in turn. This school burned down after a young Jack London had already moved with his family to a ranch in the East Bay. In the 1890s ranching days, education for the children of the area, all 10 or 15 of them, started grades 1 through 8 in a little county school, a converted house painted red that sat at the intersection of Coast Highway and Morris Point Road. The railroad grade that slashes through the hill to the south of Fairway Park District was known as Schoolhouse Cut.
This building served until the San Pedro and Tobin districts were formed. In 1914, a school was built at Sharp Park for the San Pedro district, and one at Rockaway, which was known as the Tobin School District, and of course the old San Pedro School, as everybody knows, is now the City Hall. In the election of 1949, the Rockaway and San Pedro districts were again joined, and the new district was named the Laguna Salada Union School District. The name was taken from the saltwater lagoon located in the present Sharp Park Golf Course.
Well, I graduated from the San Pedro School in 1933, and it was just the one teacher in the 8th grades, and at one time that I can remember there were 16 children in the whole school, and one family that lived up on the hill, and they had a long way to walk. It was up where Skyline College is, up that way. And there were 8 children in that family. And if it rained and really, really stormed, they didn't come to school because that was such a long ways to walk. So then there were just 8 of us, and it was so great. We'd sit around the big fire and put our feet up and have a great time. But, other than that, and when I graduated, there were 2 of us. A big class, 2 that graduated, John Blankenship and myself. And the following year there was only one, a girlfriend of mine, Frances Goldsworthy, that graduated in. So that was about the situation.
Big times.
Right?
I attended Rockaway School from 1940 to 48. I had 2 teachers. Mrs. Wallace was my 1st through 4th grade teacher, and Mrs. Grace Adams was my 5th through 8th grade teacher, and of course went on to Jefferson. My husband and I are both natives. As you know, he attended Sharp Park School, and before that my father attended school in Rockaway for a short time, and he told me that he went to the school that in a little house that is standing still at Fassler and Etkin Streets.
Well, I was born in Pedro Valley. Went to San Pedro School.
What was your maiden name?
Migalucci. Okay. Went to the San Pedro School in 1918. And my father and brothers and sisters and my mom, we ran the ranch for the Comerford estate. Lydia Fay was the one who ran it at the time. And I only went to school about a couple of years before we went back to San Francisco. I remember it was Miss Ellen Daly that that had the class at school. She taught all the grades.
Is she the one that used to pick you up in her buggy?
No, we walked it.
Okay.
Walked it.
All right, Doug, please.
Well, I was born in Rio Vista, but moved here when I was a kid, 1915. And I started school here in San Pedro in 1920. Just the one room upstairs, and there was a library just above the entrance to the school, to the city hall now.
Oh, there that
And then the basement, well, we called it the basement then, the people would all hold dances there on Saturday night.
Yeah.
And all the kids went, they were all welcome. They'd have a drummer and an accordionist, and then all the older ones would dance. They'd bring cakes and ice cream, and we'd have quite a time.
Wow.
And being there was only the two of us that graduated, but it was up on the stage, and we had the flowers and a big to-do afterwards, and I think the whole town turned out, whether they, were related or not. Everybody was there to see the graduation.
We had a large class. We had 5.
Yours was a little bit later than hers.
Right.
Population had increased.
But the year before, there was only 3, so.
They got bigger.
Yeah.
Well, this isn't concerning graduation, but from the San Pedro School, when I went there, on nice days, the teacher would take us, the whole class, down to the beach.
How large was your class?
Oh, maybe 12.
Okay.
I mean, and that's in the whole school. They'd take us all down to the beach, and we'd have schooling down there.
Oh, great.
Every May we had a May Day picnic, and we went to the Riches Ranch in Ballymore, where we had various races, and the mothers would bring their salads, and the big treat was hot dogs and punch, and that was one of our annually outings, was a May Day picnic up at Riches Ranch in Ballymore.
Which would be where now?
It's off Rena Del Mar.
The house is still there?
It's houses now. There used to be a pavilion there and a big picnic area.
The first grade was Miss Seahorn, and then I had, I remember Miss Dawson, because she was the one that put on such great plays, and we all learned different dances, and she must have really worked with us to do all that. And and Miss Crosby, I couldn't forget her. I was the world's poorest in math. I just couldn't get it. So she thought she would help me, so I wasn't being punished. But every Thursday I'd stay after school, and she was helping with the math. And that was such a great day, because that was the day the bankman came to pick up money for and he'd always want to take the teacher home. So she'd go and lock the library and do everything, and he'd do my math. 2 minutes. He was a saint. I'm sure he's up in heaven. I love that man.
I can remember that one of the things that Mrs. Adams did was we had a music teacher come from the Redwoods school district, or the San Mateo school district, and she was the Miss Works was the music teacher, and she'd come over. Miss Works, yeah, yes. And she would come over and teach us some new songs and discuss music with us. And then another most fascinating person we all were just thrilled with was a blind lady with her seeing eye dog, and she would come and read us a story in Braille, and we were just mesmerized by this woman going through the Braille and how she could read, and it was, it always stuck in my mind, this wonderful woman that could read without seeing. And Mrs. Adams was quite a teacher. I enjoyed her immensely, and she taught me many, many things beyond just schoolwork. She introduced me to opera and some of the finer things that I'm sure that I would have missed along the way, but she was just tremendous. I really admired her, miss her.
Yeah, she was great.
And I only had one teacher down here, Miss Silva. And the teachers at that time just boarded in different houses. They take turns, I guess, and board in different places. But this teacher was in love with this George Hutley. But the teachers weren't allowed to get married or go out and be seen with their boyfriends. So I can remember them telling us up at the house that the way they said they'd come and visit up at our place. And the way they said goodnight is she lived close to him, and so she pulled the curtain down at night when she was going to bed, and that was the way they said goodnight to each other.
Remote control, huh?
And they finally did get married.
Okay, happy ending.
Yeah.
I'm Jim Leonidas, Superintendent of the Pacifica School District, and I'm going to be reading minutes from 1936. This was a original book of minutes of the San Pedro School District that has minutes beginning from the 20s going into the 30s. And this is from April 29th, 1936. Meeting held at Deep Plate's place. Present Van Vincent, Mr. Plate, and Rose Davies. Warrants paid. Mr. D. Plate made the following report. The state building inspector had called him, and they both went over to the school building together. This is the San Pedro building, which is now still currently City Hall. According to Hildebrandt and Fabies, on the condition that they would let us build in the present location, the statement was made that the law call for a new school building be built according to planning and specifications of the state architects. One-story units, and many units could be added at any time. No building to be built on less than 3 acres of land. And looking over the current building, it was found that dry rot had set in and called for immediate action to reinforce the building. This would do temporarily until a new one could be purchased for a new building. The clerk was instructed to get in touch with Mrs. Abbott right away, so that because this was very serious. And they also were looking around for 3 acres to relocate the new building. What's kind of interesting about this is in 1936 that building had a serious dry rot problem, and that's still in 2007 one of the main concerns of the City Council and city staff about relocating City Hall. Thank you.
And here with us in the studio to follow up with some more current issues that face us since the 1936 days is Sharon Walker, who is the host of Pacifica Currents, and Helen James, who is involved in the schools for years on the school board in the district. I'm going to first ask Sharon, how did you happen to come to Pacifica, and how did you get involved in teaching, and what levels did you teach?
Okay, well, there's several questions there, Frank. I came to Pacifica in 1977, and it was a place that I had fallen in love with years earlier, and it just called me. And teaching became my third career, so I actually went into teaching in 1988 after being involved with a couple other careers. And so I had been living up in the Sierras, and when I went into teaching and got my credential, I decided I'd move back to Pacifica in the house that I still owned, and I would get a job in Pacifica. And the Laguna Salada School District was a district here, and I persevered, and I got a job here in the school district, and I taught in the district for 17 years and retired 2 years ago.
And what grade level were you teaching?
I taught first through 5th grades, mostly 3rd and 4th grades, at the infamous Sharp Park School, which we heard that was highlighted earlier, which is no longer, and we'll be talking probably about that school.
Okay, and Helen James, please, your involvement.
Well, we moved down here because we were among the young veterans and people looking for a house for our family. We had 4 children already, and so that was keep me pretty busy. But I got involved because I had 4 children at the school, and pretty soon there was the school, someone from the school district contacted me because they said, we're very short of substitutes, and would you like to substitute? I said, well, I don't know too much about it. I'd had a semester of education at the San Francisco State. I was impressed with what they were doing. So they said, oh, it's easy. All you need is a storybook and a whistle. Well, I learned the hard way.
And then you have a connection through education or through some other source. You want to share that with us, Sharon?
Well, we certainly do. As you mentioned, we both are involved with Channel 26. When I first met Helen, though, I had started doing some volunteering for Channel 8 at that point, which became 26. And so my first year of teaching, being a real industrious person, I decided to not only teach, but I was going to produce, and I did produce a 30-minute show for the station. Helen became my director. She helped me edit the show, and it involved the library, and it was on literacy, and it was a wonderful piece. And so I had the honor, and she's been my mentor ever since.
Well, it's very kind of a person like her to say I'm her mentor.
And Helen, you still go to the school board meetings and film that for this station?
Yes, I do. And it's a wonderful experience. I enjoy it for several reasons. I see my friends, and also they always send one of the young interns or someone with me. And so I get to meet all these wonderful young people that have come to get into this field, and it's really a joy.
In the panel that we saw in the video that was hosted by Julia Gervais, there seemed to be reference to a class, I think, graduating class of 2 or 3 or something, because there were only 8 kids in the whole school. But that's shaped Pacifica's schools and the sizes, and if you could share with us, particularly Sharon, in the more recent days, what was the highest we ever got to, and what caused it to get that way, and what caused it to drop down in numbers of students?
Well, I'll mention this, and it's going to need Helen, because she is a true historian, since I'm kind of a newcomer to the block here, but I believe it was 1969, the highest numbers were 10,000 in the school district, and that was in the elementary school district, the Laguna Salada school district. And
that didn't even include the high school?
No, because it's not a connected school district. Those numbers were separate. But now the enrollment is around 3,000. So Helen, why don't you comment about the reasons why there was the ebb and then the reduction?
Oh, well, the great influx after 46 were the veterans coming home and looking for a place to raise their family. They did not have very much money, and the developers began to look south of San Francisco and saw this land down here and started to build with new techniques that enabled them to build 100 houses in just a very short time. So they started in a Pacific manner first, and that was quite a shock to the small school district. And they had to get together and try to get some money to build other larger schools. But back to the influx, at that point, between 46 and probably 48, 49, San Mateo County was considered one of the fastest growing counties in the whole United States. They were quickly trying to fill up the land with houses for these veterans.
And by the way, there was no Pacifica then.
No, no.
Pacifica was 1957, and so we were still back in the 40s.
This was San Mateo coast side, and each little valley between the fingers of land had their own names, and new names were added as the developers came in. Some names were changed.
The names of the schools or the districts?
Of the little districts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the schools were named gradually as they came in to be.
And could that have also been perhaps there were a lot of neighborhood schools at that point too? Was that not correct, Helen?
Yes.
And the concept of neighborhood schools has changed since then, but I think that was a very strong component, was it not then?
Yes, one of the goals was to try to have neighborhood schools. Unfortunately, would
that include the mandate that you could only go to school in your neighborhood and you couldn't go across town and so on?
Right,
okay.
But that didn't, we only had that only at times and in certain places because with the influx and the building of the houses so fast, we just couldn't keep up with the amount, keep enough classrooms to satisfy all the children coming in. We just couldn't find classrooms for them. They kept building schools as fast as they could. The children came in even faster. So we had double sessions, we had triple sessions. We had something called piggyback sessions where 3 teachers would use 2 rooms and put the 3 classes in the 2 rooms, and then 1 teacher would go back and forth and help. And it worked quite well considering they were shorter classes. Classrooms.
And on that note, of course, we have combination classes now, means 1 teacher teaches 2 classes. Were there combination classes at that point, too?
Oh, yes, combination classes. There was, well, kindergarten was even on triple sessions. There were double sessions. They just tried every creative idea they could find.
Well, one of the more creative ideas to me seemed to be that whatever they would use for a school. The old traditional schoolhouse was that. Plus, it could have been a church. It could have been many other things. For example, what else did we have?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me about that. That is one of the most interesting ideas and creative ideas in our school district. Andy Odstat was building houses in the started building in the houses in the Valleymar area. No, in the Lindemar area, and he let the school district know that he was starting 200 houses. This was in January. They would be ready by that fall. I think it was even more than that. And the school district, there was no way they could build a school to meet this. But he also was a very smart man. He knew he wouldn't be able to sell houses if he didn't have a school for the children. So he proposed to the school district that he would rent them a row of houses that was just right across from the land that the Pedro Valley School was about to be built on. And he would charge them a very little sum, I don't know, $10 a month, a year rent or something. It was very minimal. And he would not put in the interior walls or the garages. And he built a covered promenade to connect the schools. And there was so they were able to
all he needed was chairs and books and teachers.
Yes. Wow. And he eventually, it came up to about 14 houses that they used. And those houses are still there. After the school finished using them, they went back to Odstat, and he finished them up, and people are still living there.
And they also used a Quonset hut at one time, a church.
A little brown church was used?
A little brown church was used as a school.
Oh, yes. And the teachers have some wonderful stories about teaching there. The first year they used it, they had racks put up for the children's clothes, and the first day of school the racks fell down. And then there was no telephone there, and they were all off. The nearest school was the Sharp Park School down, about a half mile down the hill. So they really had a problem, and one time especially, well, no, as always, the volunteers and the parents came through. There was a parent that lived just about across the street, and they knew they could go knock on her door and use the telephone if they had to. And one time, when the storm got so bad, they opened the door, and the wind blew the door off. And they had the mud to climb through, and it was a challenge. But I tell you, the teachers in this school district have really been amazing how they overcome things and do a good job of teaching.
Well, when you mentioned the school district a moment ago, there was reference to the fact that the high school is included. I always thought a unified school district would include all levels, from kindergarten or even preschool through, at least if not college, at least the high school.
But it's not a unified school district. So the high school district is Jefferson High School District, and that is separate than
But that's in Daly City. That's not even in Pacifica, but it includes Pacifica's 2 high schools.
Well, Jefferson does. It includes, yes, the 2 high schools here. But I think that Helen had made a point earlier. One of the reasons why it was perhaps not a unified school district is that originally those meetings for the school district were held outside of Pacifica. It was difficult for parents, and just the school district itself did not have the funding to fund the full program. Am I correct, Helen?
Yes. There was a point where we had to decide if we wanted to join with Jefferson. In fact, the state mandated that the smaller school districts had to join and make larger districts, because it was just costing too much tax money to keep these smaller districts going. So we tried, but it just didn't work out for quite a few reasons. All along, though, all way back, as long as there had been a high school district, the students from our area went to Jefferson High School, but they didn't necessarily, as an elementary school, belong to that district. They belonged
now
to a
we
different
have
district.
Oceana and Terra Linda.
Terra Nova.
Terra Nova, but aren't they in
They're part of the Jefferson High School district.
But was there a time when kids were only going to Daly City or San Francisco to high school? Or there was
Yeah, well, that was Jefferson High School takes in Daly City, takes in the Daly City area and
But
all
that's
this.
the district. But what about the location of the school, the high school, physically?
But
Okay.
the high schools here belong to the Jefferson
Okay, but
High
they
School
were in the
District.
coast-side area and
Yes.
then in the Pacifica area.
Yes.
Helen mentioned before the show something about fashions, and we're getting down to closing time, but tell us about the fashions through
Well,
the years.
fashions came and went, and I couldn't help but notice this one I thought was funny. Towards the end of the hippie area in the late 70s, it became very popular to wear hot pants and mini skirts, and they were mini skirts. And so I think this is how this came about. The students actually persuaded the school district in Sharp Park School to let the girls try wearing pants to school. In 1978, they tried a 2-week trial, and everything seemed to go well, and so they were allowed to wear pants to school. It was even more interesting when the teachers got to wear pants to school. But along with that, I know later on, it was quite a few years later, the new fashion was granny dresses. And lo and behold, the school said, oh no, you mustn't wear your granny dresses to school. Well, they could be dangerous if you tripped on them. But it was interesting how all through the ages the children have found ways to have conflicts with the dress code.
A quick answer on the dress code. Did they ever have uniforms required at any level of school?
No.
That never hit here. Okay, well, I want to thank Sharon Walker and Helen James for sharing with us so much information about the schools. We don't have time for all of it, so I'm going to invite you back at a date to be determined, as they say, and we'll chat more about the schools. We thank you for your knowledge of them and your interest and your passion in the schools here.
Thank you, Frank.
I'm now winding down to remind people that this is Footprints of Pacifica that you've been watching, hosted by the Pacifica Historical Society. And remember, lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind us footprints in the sands of time.